Why is the loudest civilization in human history also the most mentally ill? That's not a question your therapist wants you to ask. Because if you pull that thread, if you really tug on it, the entire fabric of modern life starts to unravel. And what you find underneath isn't pretty. It's a system, carefully constructed over the past century, designed to keep you distracted, exhausted, and just barely sane enough to keep working. The weapon they use isn't violence. It's something far more insidious. It's noise. This is the story of how silence became the rarest commodity on Earth, and why the people who stole it from you don't want you to know what you're missing. Let me paint you a picture. It's 3 a.m. You're lying in bed, but you're not asleep. Your phone is on the nightstand, face down, but you can feel it there, humming, waiting. Even in the dark, even in the supposed quiet of your bedroom, there's noise. The air conditioning cycles on. A car passes outside. Your neighbor's television bleeds through the wall. But worse than all of that is the noise inside your skull. The endless loop of thoughts, anxieties, half-remembered conversations, things you should have said, things you need to do tomorrow. Your brain won't shut off. It wasn't always like this. You remember, vaguely, a time when sleep came easier, when thoughts didn't pile up like backed-up traffic in your mind. But you can't quite remember when that was, or how you got here. Here's what they don't tell you. This isn't an accident. The sleeplessness, the anxiety, the constant sense that your brain is running on a hamster wheel, this is the intended outcome. You are living inside the most successful psychological operation in human history, and it's been running so long that you think it's just normal life. You call it stress. You call it modern living. You call it the price of success. But strip away the euphemisms and you're left with a simple truth. You've been deliberately overstimulated into a state of permanent distraction, and the moment you find silence, the moment you find actual quiet, you'll realize how badly you've been damaged. Let me take you back. Not to last year, or even last decade. We need to go back almost a century to understand how we got here, to a moment when America was loud in a different way. The noise then was industrial, factory floors, steam whistles, the clang of steel on steel. It was the roar of production, and people wore the ringing in their ears like a badge of honor. But there was something else happening in that noise, something the owners understood but never said out loud. A factory floor that's loud enough doesn't allow for conversation. Workers who can't talk to each other can't organize, can't unionize, can't realize they're all getting screwed the same way. The noise was a feature, not a bug. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to talk about the 1930s, the Depression. Millions of people suddenly had something they'd never had before: time, silence, space to think. And that terrified the people in charge, because people with time to think start asking dangerous questions. Like, why are we working ourselves to death while a handful of men own everything? Why are our children going hungry while grain rots in warehouses? Why does the system keep breaking? And why does it always break in the same direction, toward suffering, toward desperation, toward control? The New Deal programs put people back to work, sure, but there was something else happening alongside the economic recovery. A new form of noise was being introduced into American homes: the radio. Now, radio existed before the Depression, but it was in the 1930s that it became ubiquitous. By the end of the decade, more than 80% of American households had a radio. And here's what's interesting. These families, many of them still struggling, still poor, prioritized the radio above almost everything else. It was one of the last things they'd sell. Why? The official story is that it provided entertainment, information, a sense of connection during hard times. That's the kind explanation. The real explanation is darker. Radio filled the silence. It filled the gaps where dangerous thoughts might grow. It gave people something to focus on other than their own exploitation. News, soap operas, comedy shows, advertising. A constant stream of content flowing into homes, keeping minds occupied. The radio taught Americans to be comfortable with constant noise, with never being alone with their thoughts. It was the first iteration of what we now call the attention economy, and it worked beautifully. People stopped gathering on porches to talk about politics. They stayed inside, listening to voices from far away, voices that told them what to think, what to buy, what to be afraid of. Then came the war, the 1940s, and war is the loudest thing humans have ever invented. Explosions, gunfire, sirens, the scream of aircraft engines. But the war also did something else. It took an entire generation of young men and subjected them to trauma on an industrial scale. When they came home, they brought that noise with them, the internal noise, the nightmares, the startle responses, what we now call PTSD, but what they called shell shock or battle fatigue or just weakness. And the American solution to that internal noise wasn't to provide silence, wasn't to create space for healing. It was to provide more noise, more distraction, more stimulation. Keep moving. Keep working. Keep consuming. Don't think about what you saw. Don't talk about what you did. Just focus on the future. Focus on building. Focus on buying. The 1950s brought television. And if radio was the first weapon in the war on silence, television was the nuclear option. Now, you didn't just have voices in your home. You had moving images, faces, stories, advertising that was more seductive, more persuasive, more effective than anything that had come before. The average American family gathered around the television set like it was a hearth fire, except this fire burned their attention instead of logs. It consumed hours, every single night. Time that previous generations had spent talking to each other, reading, thinking, creating. All of it funneled into the glowing box in the living room. And here's the brilliant part. Television didn't just fill silence. It made silence uncomfortable. If you've ever been in a room when the TV suddenly turns off, you know that feeling. That sudden awareness of the quiet. It feels wrong, oppressive, almost frightening. Your impulse is to fill it immediately. Turn the TV back on. Play music. Check your phone. Anything but sit with the silence. This is conditioning. This is training. And it started in the 1950s with families gathered around black and white screens, learning to be afraid of their own thoughts. But let's talk about why this matters. Why did the architects of the post-war economic system care so much about keeping people distracted? The answer is simple. The American economic model, the entire global capitalist system, depends on one thing above all else: consumption. Not production, not innovation. Consumption. People buying things they don't need with money they don't have to impress people they don't like. That's the engine. That's the fuel. And consumption requires dissatisfaction. You can't sell a new car to someone who's happy with their old car. You can't sell a new phone to someone who's content with their current phone. You need people to be constantly aware of what they're missing, constantly comparing themselves to others, constantly feeling inadequate. And silence is the enemy of that dissatisfaction. Because here's what happens in silence. You start to realize you don't actually want most of the things you think you want. That car you've been saving for? In silence, you realize you don't care about it. It's just a way to get from place to place. That promotion you've been chasing? In silence, you realize it means longer hours for marginally more money and significantly more stress. That relationship you're trying to force? In silence, you realize you're only in it because you're afraid to be alone. Silence is where truth lives. And truth is terrible for business. So the noise had to increase. The 1960s and 70s brought more television channels, more radio stations. The Walkman in the late 70s meant you could take your noise with you. No more quiet walks, no more silent commutes, just constant input, constant stimulation. By the 1980s, silence was becoming rare even in places that had traditionally been quiet. Elevators, waiting rooms, grocery stores, all of them filled with muzak, with advertisements, with the hum of commerce. The system was tightening. The gaps where thought might occur were being systematically eliminated. And then came the internet. The early internet, the 1990s internet, was still relatively quiet, text-based, slow. You had to seek things out, but that didn't last. Broadband arrived, streaming video, social media, smartphones, and suddenly the noise became portable, infinite, and algorithmically optimized to be as addictive as possible. This is where we are now. This is the world you were born into or adapted to. A world where silence is not just rare but actively avoided, where being alone with your thoughts is considered boring at best, dangerous at worst. Let me tell you about the attention economy, because that's what we're really talking about here. Your attention is a commodity. It's bought and sold. Billions of dollars change hands based on how many seconds you spend looking at a screen. Every app on your phone, every website you visit, every platform you use is engaged in a war for your attention, and they're winning. The average person now checks their phone over 90 times a day. That's not a habit, that's an addiction, that's a compulsion, and it's destroying your ability to think. Human cognition requires downtime. Your brain needs periods of low stimulation to process information, to consolidate memories, to generate insights. When you deprive yourself of that downtime, when you fill every spare moment with podcasts, videos, social media, news, you're essentially running your brain at maximum capacity all the time with no chance to cool down. And what happens to a machine that runs at maximum capacity without breaks? It breaks down. That's what's happening to your mind. The anxiety you feel isn't a chemical imbalance. Well, it might be now, but it wasn't originally. Originally, it was your brain's way of telling you that something is wrong, that you're overstimulated, that you need rest. But instead of listening to that signal, you've been trained to medicate it, to push through it, to fill the discomfort with more noise, more distraction, more stimulation. The pharmaceutical industry loves this, by the way. They've made billions selling medications for anxiety and depression, and don't get me wrong, those medications help people. But we never ask the more fundamental question. Why are so many people anxious and depressed in the first place? Could it be that we're living in a way that's fundamentally incompatible with human neurology? That our brains evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in environments with long periods of quiet, of stillness, of low stimulation, and we've created a world that provides none of that? That maybe the problem isn't your brain chemistry, but the environment you're forcing your brain to operate in? But nobody wants to hear that. Because the solution to that problem isn't a pill you can take. It's a complete restructuring of how you live your life. And that's hard. That requires sacrifice. That requires you to opt out of systems that everyone else is participating in. It requires you to be weird, to be that person who doesn't have social media, who doesn't binge Netflix, who takes long walks without headphones, who sits in cafes alone without pulling out their phone, who embraces boredom, who courts silence. And our culture has trained you to believe that's abnormal. That's antisocial. That's vaguely threatening. Think about how we treat silence socially. Awkward silence, uncomfortable silence, dead air. All our language around silence is negative. We're taught from childhood that silence in conversation is something to be avoided, that you need to fill it, keep talking, keep moving, keep entertaining. A person who's comfortable with silence is seen as strange, possibly depressed, definitely not fun at parties, But here's the thing. That comfort with silence, that ability to just be without needing constant stimulation, that's not a disorder. That's health. That's what a normal, well-adjusted human nervous system looks like. The elites understand this, by the way. The people at the top of the system, the CEOs, the politicians, the people who design the attention economy, they don't live the way they want you to live. They send their kids to schools that limit technology. They go on silent retreats. They meditate. They understand the value of silence, of focus, of deep thought. But they've built a system that deprives everyone else of those things. Because distracted people are easier to control. Anxious people don't organize. Exhausted people don't revolt. They just keep working, keep consuming, keep scrolling. Let me give you a specific example. Silicon Valley executives, the people who build social media platforms, are famously protective of their own children's screen time. Steve Jobs didn't let his kids use iPads. Tim Cook doesn't have kids, but he's spoken about limiting technology use. Evan Williams, co-founder of Twitter, said he doesn't let his kids use social media. They know what they've built. They understand the psychological manipulation, the addictive design, the damage it causes, and they protect their own children from it while profiting from its effects on everyone else's children. This is the same pattern you see throughout history. The people who run tobacco companies don't smoke. The people who run fast food empires don't eat fast food. The people who design gambling systems don't gamble. They understand the product. They understand the harm. And they profit from selling that harm to you while protecting themselves and their families from its effects. The attention economy is no different. It's exploitation. It's just more subtle than a factory floor or a coal mine. It doesn't break your body. It breaks your mind. So what do? How do you escape? Because that's the question, isn't it? You're reading this or listening to this, and maybe you're feeling that uncomfortable recognition. That sense that yes, this describes your life. The constant noise, the inability to sit still, the anxiety that hums beneath everything you do, the exhaustion that no amount of sleep seems to cure. So what's the answer? The answer is radical simplicity. And I use the word radical intentionally, because what I'm about to describe will sound extreme to you. It'll sound impossible. But that reaction, that immediate sense of, I could never do that, is itself part of the conditioning. You've been trained to believe that silence is extreme, that disconnection is impossible, that you need to stay plugged in to function in modern life. But that's a lie. Start with 1 hour. 1 hour a day where you have no input, no phone, no music, no podcasts, no television, no reading, nothing. Just you and your thoughts. Sit somewhere. Walk somewhere. It doesn't matter. But do nothing. And here's what will happen. The first few days will be excruciating. Your brain will scream at you. It'll throw every uncomfortable thought, every anxiety, every worry at you all at once. This is withdrawal. Your brain has been running on constant stimulation for years, maybe decades. It's addicted, and like any addict going through withdrawal, it's going to fight you. But if you push through that, if you sit with the discomfort, something remarkable happens. The noise in your head starts to settle. Not immediately, not in a week, maybe not even in a month. But gradually, you'll notice that your thoughts become clearer, that you can focus on things for longer periods, that you sleep better, that you feel less anxious. Not because your life has changed, but because you've given your brain the space it needs to process your life. Once you can do 1 hour, expand it. 2 hours, half a day, whole weekends. Delete the apps that are engineered to capture your attention. And I mean actually delete them, not just move them to a folder or turn off notifications. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Whatever your poison is, get rid of it. You'll be amazed at how much time you suddenly have, how much mental energy, how much clarity. Then look at your physical environment. Turn off the television. And I mean really turn it off. Not just when you're not watching it. Get rid of it entirely. Read, instead, actual books, paper, because reading requires active engagement. Your brain has to work to decode the symbols on the page, to construct the images and ideas. It's active, not passive. It builds cognitive capacity instead of eroding it. Create spaces of silence in your home, a room, or even just a corner where there's no technology, no screens, no speakers, just space. Space to think, space to be. Spend time there every day. Let it become your refuge, your fortress against the noise. And here's the most radical part. Reduce your work. I know. You can't afford to. You have bills, responsibilities, a mortgage. But here's the truth. Most of the things you think you can't afford to lose, you don't actually need. The bigger house, the nicer car, the expensive clothes. All of it is just more noise, more distraction, more ways to avoid confronting the emptiness that silence reveals. What if you worked less, earned less, owned less, and in exchange got your mind back, got your life back? What if that trade was worth it? This isn't about becoming a monk. You don't have to move to a monastery or live in a cabin in the woods, though if you want to do that, go ahead. This is about recognizing that the current system is designed to keep you overstimulated, anxious, and distracted, and choosing to opt out, choosing to reclaim your attention, your time, your silence, choosing sanity over the endless noise. The system will tell you this is impossible. Your friends will think you're strange. Your family might worry about you, but that's because they're still inside the machine. They're still running on the hamster wheel, and people on the hamster wheel always think the people who step off are the crazy ones. Let them think that. You'll be too busy remembering what it feels like to be human. Silence is a weapon, but not in the way they've been using it, not as a tool of control, as a tool of liberation. Because in silence, you remember who you are beneath all the conditioning. You remember what you actually want, not what advertising told you to want. You remember what matters. And once you remember, once you really see clearly, you become very difficult to manipulate, very difficult to control, very dangerous to a system that depends on your compliance. So find the silence. Protect it. Fight for it. Your sanity depends on it. Your life depends on it. And maybe, just maybe, if enough people step off the hamster wheel, if enough people reclaim their minds, the whole machine grinds to a halt. That's the hope, anyway. That's the revolution hiding in the quiet, the one they're terrified you'll discover.